Hello and welcome to the in-character narrative playthrough of Unbroken, the board game of survival and revenge. In this playthrough, I'm going to try to talk through the events of the game as they happen from the perspective of its protagonist. This is not intended for people who want to learn the game. In fact, I will try to avoid any reference to the actual in-game mechanisms to not break the immersion in the story. I will be playing on the hard difficulty to reflect that my small effort starts at 10 as opposed to 13, and during every combat the monsters will be attacking first. With that aside, let's dive right in. My name is Maxin Zenma, and I'll be damned if I'm going to die here in these depths. I was one of the 4 desperate souls who descended here in search of treasure, but I guess I could never expect what awaited us here. And neither did my companions. The fools were quick to die to the savage attack of the monsters. Now I find myself barely alive, bleeding, without a weapon or an idea where I am. But as I said, I'll be damned if I'll make this underground tunnel my grave. So the first thing that I'm going to need is to rest up a little bit. I'm going to try to fashion a weapon out of whatever scraps I can find. And then we'll see if I can have a bit of a rematch with the monsters who led to my desperate circumstances. As I staggered down the tunnel, the first couple of things that I have encountered was a locked jail cell and an old kobold. The old kobold wanted treasure, something I definitely did not have, and I had no way of opening the jail cell, so I decided to just spend a little bit of time to rest and recover my strength. Things were not looking great for me, and I thought that perhaps spending a little bit of time to make more of a plan and get familiar with my surroundings would be a good idea. So I put myself against the wall and spent a little bit of time just studying my surroundings, making sure I'm a little more prepared for whatever came next. Continuing my path, I noticed a large snake slithering alongside the cavern floor. Hunger reminded me about its presence, and I figured that now was the time to make sure that I don't die of starvation. So, using a little bit of knowledge that I have gained, I carved up the snake into what I hoped was edible meat for later. The time was running short, and I could already hear the rustling and the scraping of claws against the floor not far away. So I was sure that danger was imminent, and I did not yet feel that my power was quite as much as I wanted it to be. So I wanted to make sure that I have a chance to rest and recover a little bit of strength before whatever was making that sound would encounter me. Using a little bit of time, I recovered a bit of strength, and then I was faced with a dilemma. Was I going to spend a little bit more time to try to rest, or was I going to just rush the monster and try to face whatever was waiting for me? A decision I made was coming back to my days on the dark streets of Oldstrad. I decided to take a peek around the corner and make sure that whatever was awaiting me was not overly onerous, so that I could manage the amount of time it took. Nothing in particular gained my interest. However, instead of looking to scrap some of these old half-rusted swords, I decided to rest just a little bit more to have another little bit of effort. With that, I jumped around the corner, my bare fists clenched, to face whatever was waiting for me. I was not prepared for the thing that I have seen hunched around the stone as it jumped at me. Eyes blazing, this was a disgusting human rat hybrid. Her claws clenched, her eyes looking over me as if I was a potential meal. Disgusting drops of saliva were hitting the dungeon floor. Looking over her, I became unnerved, yet I knew that in order to survive these depths, I would need to face that monster and probably many worse than her. I lunged at her despite my fear, knowing that it was either her life or mine. She was awaiting my attack and met me with a strike of her claws, cutting me up a little bit. Not paying attention to a small wound, I responded, smashing her with my bare fists. Oh. So it took me quite a bit of effort, but one of the hits landed with a soft, with a crunch as I heard teeth break. The monster got definitely enraged by that and came at me with renewed energy. Stealing a piece of food from my backpack, she threw it wildly away as she was flailing at me with all of her diminishing strength. Then I clasped my hand around her furry neck and pushed until she struggled no more. I was panting heavily, but my first combat was done. Looking over the contents of her backpack, I found some valuable trinkets. I also found that because I managed to defeat her fairly quickly, it allowed me to gain a little bit of more time for whatever was coming up next. The fight did leave me feeling a little bit more aware of my surroundings, and I felt that even the short time that I spent down here allowed me to better face whatever was going to come next. I was hungry, and I decided to have a little bit of food that I had from the snake that I carved up earlier. The food was welcome and allowed me to recover a little bit more strength. With that, despite the fact that the encounter did leave me afraid of what was going to come, and I was not sure if I was going to be able to relax anymore and have an appropriate rest, I was ready to proceed and find out what was awaiting for me next. I continued my path along the dark, damp corridors of this godforsaken catacomb. I knew that I had to keep moving, even though my encounter with the were-rat left me unnerved and feeling afraid. I also knew that I didn't have a lot of strength left, and I had to recover a little bit before I would face another adversary. Seeing that an old fire pit was still smoldering, I felt bad that I didn't have enough wood to rekindle it, so instead I just sat around it. Even though I was cold, I still was able to recover. I guess I would be able to recover a little bit of my strength if I was not afraid. That was no longer an option. A small imp was peeking out from around the corner, offering to trade some of the food I might have for metal and a place to rest. Not having any food, I had to skip and pass on his generous offer. I realized that if things would keep going like this, I would not be able to recover any strength or find anything useful. So I tried to use some of my training and sneaking around again to look a little bit less cautiously around and find more things that I could take advantage of. I did stumble on an old wooden structure. It was falling apart, but I figured that some of the wood that I found I would be able to put to good use. So I did spend a little bit of my strength and a lot of time to take it apart, and as a result, I was now a proud owner of a whole bunch of discarded wood. I was faced with a tough choice. Was I going to fashion a weapon out of the wood that I just got, or leave it for a little bit later. I decided to wait and see what the next turn would bring. Sneaking around once again, I picked around the corner and proceeded. A strange sight was greeted me as I entered the next room. A whole set of knights in rusted, semi-falling apart armor were standing there as if containing a silent vigil over whatever was in that room. Feeling unnerved as I was, I could not remain there long, but I did spend a little bit of time to take a few scraps of metal from the knight's armor. The statues were lifelike, and I couldn't help but wonder what resulted in them finding their place in that room. The time was certainly running short, and I was in a rush. I did hear the low guttural growling not far off, and I wanted to make sure that I did have at least a little bit of strength, something I was completely running out of. I did recall someone close to me as I stood there worrying, not sure if I was ever going to make it out alive. As I stood there contemplating, I figured that some of the moss that was growing on the wall of the cavern could actually be used for sustenance. So I spent a little bit of time to scrape it off. With that moss and a little bit of firewood that I collected, I figured I could really use some time to rest. So I was figuring out that I was really becoming quite a traveler here. So I made a little bit of a camp for myself, made a little bit of a fire, had some food, and with time I found myself energized and ready to proceed. Now I was feeling a little bit better, and things were finally looking up, though I was still unarmed. The next encounter that I had was somewhat surprising. Apparently not all of the monsters who lived here were hostile. A goblin trader who was speaking common tongue to me in a raspy voice using simple sentences made it clear that he wanted some of my metal in exchange for some food and information about the surroundings. I did not mind such a trade. After all, I had some metal that I stole from the knight statues, and I figured that knowledge and sustenance would be welcome in my trying time here. Finding myself short of breath again, after hours of traveling around, I decided to spend a little bit more time and make another camp. Spending another firewood, having more wood, more food, I felt myself once again rested and energized. However, my attention was quickly distracted as I heard once again the growling coming from around the corner and the sound of falling pebbles. Not wanting to risk it, I decided to rush towards the danger and meet it face first. Not having a weapon, it was probably a dumb decision, but coming down here was a dumb decision in the first place. So it's not like I was going to start being smart all of a sudden. The creature that I encountered was a small snarling imp. It was blinking in and out of visibility, hiding behind rocks. Landing a hit on it would not be an easy task. However, I was feeling pretty aware after my conversation with the goblin who told me about the specifics of the rocks around here, and I knew that there was a way for me to catch the imp. I knew if I could only get my hands on it, I could overpower the small creature with no trouble. However, the imp was the first one to act. He seemed to be enraged by the fact that I have a treasure and wanted it at all costs. He swung at me, trying to steal the trinkets that I picked up off of the were-rat, but instead it only hurt me slightly. Feeling a little discouraged by his lack of success, he stepped back and continued his attack, now in a more disciplined and organized way. He flapped his wings around, confusing me. As I was stumbling back, I hit my head against a rock, and I realized that I was left disoriented. When it came my turn to act, I realized that I was no longer able to discern him between the rocks, so I had to spend a little bit of time to catch my breath and find where I was able to catch him once again. The monster used this time to keep slashing at me, appearing suddenly and unexpectedly from the stone hiding places that he was using. Once again, he managed to land another blow that pushed me back against the wall. A loose boulder fell on my head, confusing me even more. My vision was starting to blur, and the blood from a scrape over my eye was starting to reduce my visibility even further. I was starting to become desperate. I could not keep this up for much longer. I used whatever was left of my strength to get my bearings once again, to try to make sure that I would be able to get him. He used a pause in my orientation and now was coming in for the kill. What he was able to do was strike me, leading to a lot of blood loss as I was bleeding from my side. However, it did give me a moment to wait until he got closer, and I was finally able to get a good strike in. With all my power, I lunged at him. He was trying to hide, but I knew where he was going to be, so I grabbed him and I smashed his head in against the rocky side of the dungeon. I kept striking him until nothing was left. Finally, as his tiny frame stopped struggling, I collapsed next to him. I was nearly spent from the exertion. I was not sure if I would be able to continue. I did collect some of the bracelets that the creature was wearing from him, but I was not sure how much that would help me to survive in this dark time. Finally, studying the corpse of the little creature, I found out that his blood was a very potent poison. Taking as much of it as I could carry with me in a small vial that I had left, I knew that with appropriate amount of cunning, I would be able to use it to hurt my enemies in the future. The question was I going to survive that far? The struggle left me exhausted and starving, and I did not have any food whatsoever to feed that starvation. The creature itself was highly poisonous, and I wasn't about to risk my failing health by trying to consume any of its flesh. So instead, I just sat there as my strength was leaving me. Finally, I got up, no longer afraid. The memories of the fight with the were now a distant shade, and I decided to continue on. I was stumbling, had practically no energy left. My wounds were grievous, and I was trailing a dripping trail of blood across the dungeon floor. Despite all that, I was determined to not sell my life too cheaply. I knew that whatever was waiting for me next, I would likely not be able to defeat, so I wanted to make sure that whatever it was, I was equipped to at least get around it. So I spent some time to climb on some elevation to try to scout out what kind of monster would be ahead. What I found out did not fill me with confidence. Some distance away, a huge lumbering bugbear was waiting. I heard of such creatures. I knew that they were greedy and always looking for food. Now, if only I was able to find something to bribe him with, I would likely be able to avoid a confrontation. Looking at his giant club and sturdy armor, I knew that taking him head on, would be a foolish idea. With that, I started down. I was carrying some treasure, both from the were-rat and from the imp. Treasure that I could not eat, treasure that did not do me any good. I was hoping I would be able to find an opportunity to exchange it. However, I'm not sure if the goblin or kobold traders that I've encountered earlier would make a return. Using my sneaking around, I decided to continue my way. And just as my luck would have it, the goblin trader did come stumbling around another corner. It seems he was making rounds and looking for advantageous trades. This time around, even though the metal he was offering me did not do me any good, I figured it was not going to be any less useless than the treasure I was carrying. So I was happy to part with some of the treasure, get 2 rusted blades of metal for my trouble. I continued on, once again being actively mindful that my strength was almost at its limit. And I was faced with an interesting dilemma. I did notice a source of food, but also a great place to rest. I knew I couldn't spend all the time to take advantage of both places, so I had to make a difficult decision: would they need more? The starvation was reminding itself to me, so I decided to climb down to the brambles and collect some of the berries growing among them. It took some time, but I knew that the food I gained would be extremely important for me. I knew it was important for me to continue to find things that I needed, so I carefully snuck around yet another corner and continued my way up the winding passage. An old bear trap was of no use to me. However, I could either collect some wood or take a moment to eat my food. Despite the fact that I wanted to eat more than anything, I knew that I needed the food to help me bribe the bugbear. So I decided to take the time to gather a bit of wood instead. Moving on, I desperately wanted a place to rest, so I was hoping that a convenient crevasse would present itself. While no such luck occurred, what did happen was a good fire pit that I was able to make a little bit of a fire in and enrich my food supplies by cooking some of the things that I collected from the brambles. I now had quite a bit of food, but I knew that in order to trick the bugbear, I would need more than just a tasty morsel. I did decide that if I want to really have a chance of surviving this, I needed to have a proper rest. So I took some time to make a camp using some of the skills that I picked up in these tunnels, and I find myself recovering quite well. The only thing I was short of to trick the bugbear now is just a few bits of knowledge about the customs of these places. Something that I knew that I could remember if I would just plan a little bit more and try to recall what I knew. I stumbled upon another moss-covered, falling apart structure and decided to use my time there to have a little bit more food and collect a little bit more scraps of wood and regain a little bit of my strength as I used the shelter provided by the collapsing watchtower. What was it doing here, I wonder? At some point, people lived here who constructed these things and watched over the monsters who would encroach on their territory, who would make a settlement so far down. Nevertheless, the more immediate needs pressed, and I knew that I was getting closer to the bugbear, the only exit from the current labyrinth that I was in, guarded by his enormous bulk. I did decide to spend some time to come up with a good plan of how I was going to trick the monster. That did take some time, and I was getting hungry and tired. However, I knew that if I was going to not trick him and try to face him in a battle, that would not end well for me. Stumbling upon a strange crystal cavern, I did take a little bit more time to rest and regain some of my lacking strength. I pushed on, trying to sneak around yet another corner, hoping that whatever was waiting for me there would be advantageous and would help me even further in my quest to rid myself of this place. A strange bird crossed my path. As I was considering chasing after it, I realized that the effort would be too much, even though the bird did look delicious. I found out that if I was just going to take a little bit of a moment and rested myself, that would probably be the best thing that I could do for myself right now. Emerging from a crooked pillar, I faced the bugbear. His face cracked in a grin as he was weighing his club, getting ready to smash my head in. However, I offered him the food that I prepared, and I knew the appropriate few words in his language to make sure that he would not attack right away. Flattering his muscles and his obvious martial prowess, as I could see was true judging by the belt of skulls that he was wearing, a macabre reminder of his ability to destroy people. I gave him all I had to eat, which left me without any food for myself, but happy, satisfied with my flattery and chowing down on the food I provided, the bugbear did let me go. I was now ready to begin my final push. However, I was completely starving, and the last thing that I gave to the bugbear was the only food that I had left. I was feeling its absence acutely, and as I made yet another step, I collapsed from hunger. I knew that I hadn't eaten in a while, and the food that I did have, I gave away. So my strengths were leaving me just as I was trying to continue my push onwards. A spasm took over my stomach as I vomited and just couldn't take another step. My vision swam, and the walls of the dungeon started blurring together in a delirious illusion as I was contemplating, how did I make it here? Why did my greed leave me to such a terrible fate? I knew that I could not take yet another step. I took one last look at the road ahead. I thought that I saw a glimpse of sunlight, but after all, I knew that that was probably only an illusion. After all, down here, it was only death and darkness. And soon, I was going to become just another corpse to add to the richness of the dark. So that concludes our in-person narrated session of Unbroken. I hope you enjoyed it. It was definitely a loss, in case you did not figure that out, because at level 3 I lacked all 3 food that I had to eat, so I had to lose a total of 6 effort. I only had 5, I think. I had 3 small and 2 medium effort. So because I had to spend an effort when I could not, I died of starvation, as I colorfully described. So I hope you enjoyed it. This was definitely a game that did not go well for me. It started off all right with taking on the were-rat, but the imp really exerted me, because first of all I had a treasure activating his ability to take an extra attack, so that he took two attacks to start the combat. One because I had a treasure, and another one because I was playing on hard. And both of those attacks, he kept knocking down my cunning, which was something that I absolutely had to have in order to attack him. So ever since that combat, really, I don't think there was a big chance of success. And I was happy with the plan that I made to trick the level 3 monster. I was not drawing very well in terms of the encounter cards. I should have probably risked this last time, just so that I could have at least a little bit. That probably would have made a difference between me dying or not. Let's see if I would pick one of the cards that would have time of 1. There we go. So I could have just used this, rested, and then I would have enough. I would not die of starvation. Hindsight is 20/20, I guess. Yeah, so that was kind of dumb of me to not realize that after tricking the bugbear, I would not have enough effort to manage my starvation. So as a result, I died. Another thing to point out here, interestingly, is that I was really regretting during the fight with the imp that I spent all of my character ability uses to draw extra encounter cards through the sneaks take a peek ability. I was kind of forced to do it because I was, as you recall, afraid from my encounter with the were-rat. But if I would have at least one use of that of my character ability, I could dodge one of those boulders he kept dropping on my head. I could dodge one of the confuse effects and make it so that I would not lose a cunning. Then that would allow me to kill the imp much faster. But there we go. Didn't know that. Just an example where in Unbroken you really have to judge. There are always multiple demands on the limited resources that you possess, and you have to be very, very mindful of when to spend and when to save for later. So once again, I hope you enjoyed it. My descriptions were a little stuttering at times. It's fairly difficult to create cohesive narrative on the fly, but I definitely enjoyed it. So I hope you had a good time as well. Thank you for checking it out, and thank you to everyone who has supported the GoFundMe campaign. I appreciate that support more than I can explain in words. And rest assured that we are continuing our work to make sure that everyone who supported Unbroken receives their copy. Thank you very much for watching, and good luck surviving the dark.